Happy Friday evening to one and all. Welcome to episode 6 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. Now, you'll notice that I am wearing a Yankee cap. Today's episode is not about baseball. It's about a little bit about me, but it's about a very important native New Yorker who turns 81 today. And many of you know that we're talking about Martin Scorsese, the filmmaker. Arguably the greatest living filmmaker. It's always up for debate. But it's incredible to think that he is this old, this active, this energetic and passionate and still excited like a schoolboy with not just making movies, but arguing about movies, contributing to the debate on the future of cinema, whether comic book films are helpful or harmful to the overall look and feel of cinema. And, you know, he's certainly gotten in a little bit of hot water for some of his comments about comic book movies. But if someone were to ask me, I would say that anything to get people to the cinemas is good. And Chris Nolan has talked about that. Like, if you ask Chris Nolan, are you excited that Barbie did so well? He's probably not. But he said there are people who are now seeing that film multiple times in theaters who may otherwise have waited for streaming. So he's looking at it as a glass half full, whereas Martin is looking at it as a glass half empty. Now, I could sit here and tell you that I believe that the 1976 film Taxi Driver is Mr. Scorsese's masterpiece. You could argue otherwise. You'd be wrong. But you could talk about Raging Bull, as many have and continue to. You could talk about Goodfellas. You could talk about any of his movies. You could tell me, Jack, Departed is the best movie he ever made. You don't know what you're talking about. But this is not a podcast about whether or not such and such a movie is Martin's masterpiece, or what you think of him just as a personality who has become so much more active on social media, TikTok with his daughter Francesca, and Francis Coppola as well, his old buddy. You know, it warms the heart to know that so many of these old gents who kind of came up through the ranks, not necessarily together, but roughly the same time, are still friends. Coppola, Scorsese, Spielberg, De Palma. I just think that's fucking awesome that they're still pals, that they've been friends since the 70s, they've worked together on occasion and still wishing each other well. You know, Francis Coppola sharing and resharing things about Scorsese's, new movie, Killers of the Flower Moon. It's great. But the subject of episode 6 is Martin Scorsese and the release of his Thanksgiving 1995 crime movie, Casino, which is one of the more polarizing films in his filmography. Maybe up there with Age of Innocence, who, you ask someone like me, I have Age of Innocence in Marty's top 5, and there are plenty of people like, bro, the movie put me to sleep. But Casino is definitely one of those films that some people love, some people hate, but most people have a strong opinion, one way or the other. It's a good companion piece, forgive the word good, to Goodfellas. Oh my God, he's copying himself and it sucks. Pesci's playing the same character and he's less interesting. DeNiro's boring. Sharon Stone. The only good thing is James Woods. These are different things that I've heard about it. I think the movie is just okay. I do not have it in my Scorsese top 10. But the story is this. In the fall semester of 1995, New York University, I was 21 years old in the cinema studies department. It was my second full year at New York University. And the cinema studies majors were offered, or I'm not sure what the phrasing would be, but we had passes to a sort of benefit screening that was set up at NYU, probably because Scorsese had gone there. You know, he was an NYU graduate himself. And I believe that's why. So this is the sort of thing that nowadays we could just Google it, but I don't think that this was recorded. Like, I don't think that if you can go right ahead, but I don't think you're going to find any information on this. But it was a screening, and it was what they called a reception. So like a little bit of a cocktail hour after the movie. And everybody that I knew who was in the cinema studies department, well, of course you were going to go. What are you, fucking stupid? Because not only are you going to get to see Martin's new movie before it's released, and a little bit of true history is that while Martin was editing The Age of Innocence, and it took him a long time to edit that movie, his original cut, which again, I don't believe was a director's cut, but his assembly cut was an hour longer than what ended up being, the final film, which is not a short movie anyway. But he taught an advanced seminar in the cinema studies department. I want to say it was either fall 92 or spring 93. It doesn't matter. I wasn't there. So I didn't have an opportunity to either take it or not take it. I'm sure there was some kind of a lottery system because everybody would have wanted to take that. And those advanced seminars usually had like about 15 students. But everyone wanted to see this movie. And I wanted to see this movie too. It's not like I was indifferent to it. I was excited. So they set up this screening, and the little pamphlet or flyer, not on the internet, they actually handed us a ditto. Sharon Stone, a co-star of the film. Robert De Niro, nominally the star of the film. You could argue that Pesci's character kind of dominates, but De Niro has the most screen time. And Martin Scorsese himself were going to be at this screening and reception. And we were told that the stars knew who we were going to be. And they weren't instructed to be nice. But the idea was that they were going to be okay with us schmoozing with them. And Scorsese's reputation then as now was he loved talking movies with anyone and everyone. So nobody was worried about him. But people were a little nervous about, Bobby D, and De Niro was out in theaters with two movies at the same time. Kind of like DiCaprio in '02 with Spielberg's Catch Me If You Can and Scorsese's Gangs of New York. In theaters concurrently. What a coup. Well, 1995, Mr. De Niro had Heat, a great, great movie. Certainly one of the best thrillers of the 90s. And plenty of people I know have it in their all-time top 10 favorite films. Very few people don't love, the Pacino-De Niro pairing. And Casino. So we knew that this was all going on at the same time. Wow, what a great, great times for De Niro. Can't wait to see Casino. And everyone who was a cinema studies major went to that screening except me. Why didn't I go? Was I so busy? Did I have such an active social life that I was fighting the young ladies off with a stick? No. I didn't go simply because I was a disagreeable, miserable, petulant, whining, spoiled brat. And everyone who went, they all said pretty much the same thing. De Niro was much more gracious than expected. Not that they thought that De Niro was going to be angry or uncommunicative, but he had a reputation for being a little tricky in public. That he was always very, very cautious with what he said and who he spoke to. Can't really blame him. But people who ended up at the screening were very, very surprised, and that he was nice. He was willing to pose for pictures. No cell phones with cameras. That the cell phones of the day looked like stereos. He was super gracious. And Sharon Stone, if memory serves, ended up not making it because the day of the screening, there was a nor'easter, and she, from what we were told, or what they were told, was that she was pretty much stuck at, Waldorf or, whatever hotel she stayed at. She ended up not coming out. So it was just, as far as I know, Scorsese and De Niro that were there. It could have been one of the other producers or maybe a cinematographer, but I don't know. What I do know is each person that I spoke to, and I was friends with, or at least on friendly terms with a number of other cinema studies majors. They all were so excited about the fact that they had met Martin Scorsese, and that he was so nice to them, that he didn't rush any of them. That, in other words, it was a sort of setup that if you didn't know who he was, it was just this energetic ball of fire type of an individual. And again, we see Martin today, 81 years old today, God bless him. He was 53, 54 at the time. So only a handful of years older than I am now. He would be a Generation Xer, like the tail end of it, if this were then, right? 54. He didn't rush anybody off. He was just having normal conversations with all of the students. And he was so on top of things. You can imagine that he's a voracious reader, then as now. You know, I've seen shots of the library that he has at home. It's extensive, not surprisingly. But students said that they asked him questions about readings that we had done on his career and on his specific films that maybe we had watched in a class or another class. Nobody was able to stump him. He was familiar with all of the film theory kind of things that had been written about him, about his work, by historians and scholars like Robin Wood, Noel Carroll, who had written extensively on Taxi Driver, comparing it to The Searchers. And 3 people said that Martin was very mixed up by that particular essay, which I had read, and we all had to read it, and they were marveling at the fact that this man was so on top of everything. You know, and it didn't come across as if he was reading this material to get angry and say, well, this is bullshit. He genuinely was curious what people thought of different films. And like there was one essay that many of us had read which compared Taxi Driver and Dirty Harry. That he got a kick out of. He loved Dirty Harry. He thought it was terrific. He liked the camera angles, and he even mentioned that there were a couple of angles I definitely cribbed from that because I thought the looks of the guns were so perfect that it worked for the story I was trying to tell. So I do recall listening to my classmates sing the praises of Mr. Scorsese. And I really felt bad. I wasn't being petulant. I wasn't being whiny. I just kind of felt sad and sorry because I should have gone. And I just didn't go because I was miserable and angry and all of that. And the takeaway is there are certain chances that you have in life that are so obvious that you need to take them, you need to grab them and run with them. Or you will have, to say a lifetime of regret maybe is an overstatement, but it's something that you look back on and say, there wasn't any reason for me to do or not do, depending on what we're talking about. There wasn't any reason for me to not take part. I was just being a problem. I was just being difficult for the sake of being difficult. So, a word of advice: if there is something that you have an opportunity to do, if you have the ability to project down the road and say, the old short-term pain, long-term gain, if you believe that you are going to have an experience, even if you don't want to do it, even if it's a hassle. I don't want to drive 3 hours. I don't want to sit on the train. It's going to be terrible weather. I'm going to get wet. Don't let life pass you by, is the advice. If I could go back in time, I would tough it out, and I would have been miserable and lonely, and I don't have any friends, no girls like me. I would have gone. I would have had the opportunity to meet, whether or not you think he's the greatest living filmmaker, he's one of them at absolute worst. Even Pauline Kael, may she rest in peace. I'd be hard-pressed to say that if she were around, she'd say, no, he's not one of the better ones. You know, Pauline Kael loved his buddy Brian De Palma. I don't know if she ever actually said she thought De Palma was a better filmmaker, which is complete lunacy. I love De Palma, but he's not Martin Scorsese. But an opportunity to meet someone like that in your chosen field, something, an area of study, something you love with a passion. Don't let it pass you by. Don't make excuses. Grab the brass ring. Have an experience. Something that you can talk about as an actual real life event rather than talking about it from the perspective of people who did go, who did show up for themselves and show up in their own lives. I was 21, and for any of you out there who are in that rough age bracket, let's say, still in your 20s, don't let things like that pass you by. Take them. You have an opportunity to do a road trip to go, like if you're into fitness, somebody says, hey, we're going to go to the Arnold Classic. Let's get in the car and go. If at all possible, do it. Take it. Don't let it become a regret. As me, 28 years ago, just shrugged his shoulders and missed out on an opportunity to meet Martin Scorsese and Mr. DeNiro, and to see a movie that I really wanted to see free of charge ahead of time because I was in this program at New York University. What a little brat. Don't be like I was. Be better. And that brings us to an end of episode 6 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast.